Hi, I'm Paul, the Happy Gilder. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to cover the digital process of converting any font into something a little bit more elaborate that will work nicely for a kind of etching template or a gilding template. It's a beginner tutorial in Photoshop, so it's really step by step and easy to follow. But before I crack on with that, if you're a fan of Victorian techniques, gold leaf, sign painting, reverse glass and lots more, then you're in the right place, because that's all this channel's about, and I try to release a video every week. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description, and I reward my patrons with a different vector design every month. There's also a link to my Etsy shop and my Flickr account where you can see some of my old work that I've produced over the years. Anyway, that out of the way, let's crack on with it.
Okay, so I've opened Photoshop and all I've done is created a blank document. That document size is 16 by 12 inches at 300 dpi, and at the moment I've got none of my tool palettes open. So I'm going to get up what I need to kind of make this fancy font. So firstly, and pretty much as standard, I'll always have my layers open, and then I'm going to have my brush settings open as well for a bit later on. Now, if these are ever getting in the way, you can click this little arrow and that will put them into this sort of small window, and then you can pop them back out whenever you need them. But for now, layers is what I'm going to work with, and I'm just going to press T to go to my type tool, click anywhere on the page, and in this case I have got a pretty fancy font. It's a letterhead font called Whistler. I'm just going to use the letter B in this example. So I'm going to press the arrow key at the top, and then I'm just going to press Control and T, and that brings up my transform tools, and I'm just going to scale that up. Just pop that in the center. Now all I'm going to do to start with is work with two layers, but before I do anything I'm going to convert this type layer into a shape, and I'll show you the reason for that once I've done it. To do that, I right click on the type layer, and then I'll go down to convert to shape. Now when I go to my arrow tool, at the top bar here, that gives me my shape options and what I can do. At the moment this is a shape that's filled with black and it's got no stroke on it. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to work with two copies of this, so I'll duplicate this, and I can do that by right clicking and going to duplicate layer, or you can just click it and drag it into the plus icon at the bottom here. One of these layers I'm going to keep as a shape, and the other I'm going to rasterize, which means I'm going to convert it to pixels. So to do that, I just right click on here and I go to rasterize layer. So I've got the exact same looking layer on top of the other, but one of them is pixel based and one of them is vector based. Now the first thing I'm going to do, just to make it easier to see while I do this, is go back to my shape layer, make sure I'm on my arrow tool, and I'm just going to fill this for now with red. And that's done up here, and that's it. And now I'm going to go back to my rasterized layer and just click on that. Now the next thing I'm going to do is zoom in on this, and the reason being there's a sort of fault in Photoshop, or it might not be a fault, it might be a setting I haven't checked, but you can use your arrow keys to move things by one sort of nudge at a time. Unfortunately, where you'd expect this to be one press equals it moves by 1 pixel, that doesn't actually happen. The more you zoom in, the more minute those movements are, and I want them to be very minute at the moment. So I'm just going to scale this up, and using my zoom tool, which is here, but I always do it by holding Control and spacebar and then just clicking, I'm just going to zoom in to a kind of area of this, and then if you hold the spacebar you can use the hand tool to kind of pan around. So what I'm going to do with the background layer selected, or the rasterized layer selected, I'm going to press Control and T, and that's got my transform tools up. Now I'm not actually going to transform this, but the action I do after this requires me to do this as a transform. So all I'm going to do is press my arrow key once to the right and then once down, and then I'm going to press return, and that's that. Now if I zoom right in, you can see that what that's done is move that rasterized layer one nudge to the right, one down, and you can start to see the black. Now what I do now, holding down Control, Shift and Alternate, I'm then just going to tap T, and if you look at my layers panel, you can see that has made another layer and it's done the exact same movement. So if I just keep pressing T, that just keeps duplicating that layer and nudging it that tiny bit, meaning that it's kind of giving this 3D effect to this font. Now you do this as many times as you want. Obviously the more layers you have, the more memory it's going to take up, but once I've got this to the depth I want it, I'm going to combine these layers anyway, so it doesn't matter. It's only going to be big for a short space of time. So I'm just going to press Control and 0 to fit that on screen, and I think that's looking pretty good. I'm actually going to go a few more, so holding down Control, Alt and Shift, just keep tapping the T. It'll probably go up to about 80. Something like that looks good. And then all I need to do is click on the last layer that was created, zoom right down to the bottom, hold Shift and then click on the bottom one, and then I'm just going to press Control and E, and that just combines all of those together. So I've now got my vector layer and then my rasterized kind of, not really a drop shadow, but more the kind of 3D element to it. So that's looking really good already. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to now duplicate the shape layer, and we're now going to be working solely in vectors up until we start making this more sort of decorative. So I'll duplicate this layer, and because I'm creating this so that it can be used as a kind of sandblasting template, obviously we need to separate things out by having the kind of mirrored sections in between. So I'm going to go to the original vector layer, and then I'm going to go to stroke, and at the moment you can see this line through here means there is no stroke on it. So I'm going to click on white, and then I'll start off with 10 pixels. And you can see that has done a very fine stroke around the center of the sort of vector line that creates the shape, and that's not what we want. So I go into the actual line itself. I'm going to go down to this align. At the moment it's doing the center, and I want it to do the outside. So I'll click here, and now you can see you've got that really nice sort of separation where, you know, it's going to be easy to sandblast. It's going to be easy to kind of do some nice brush blending on these sort of 3D elements. So that's separated that out for starters, which is exactly where we want to be. And when I'd said earlier there's a reason for me converting from a font to a shape, it's because your stroke options aren't as broad with a font. So I just stroke the outside of this, and I'm going to now, with my new shape layer, stroke the inside, but you can't do that when it's a font. You can only run that stroke around the actual center line that creates the shape. So anyway, I'm just going to press Control and 0 to put that on screen. Actually just Control and the plus button to zoom it in a bit. And for now, I'm going to leave this red just because it's going to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. But this is now going to be something that I stroke the inside. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my arrow key. I'm going to change the fill to nothing, which won't do anything in terms of what you're seeing on the screen because there's the red layer behind it. I'm going to change my stroke to black. I'm going to change it to 10 pixels like I did last time, and I'm going to set that stroke to inside. So again, you can already see this building up really nicely. So we've now got the black stroke on the inside, the mirrored sort of line here, and then the stroke, and then the drop shadow on the outside. So I need to just do this one more time, and the way I'm going to do that, let's just make this a little bit easier to kind of follow. So I'm going to call this layer 3D. I'm going to call this layer fill, and you can rename these by just double clicking on them. And I'm going to call this one inner stroke. So the inner stroke is just that. If I hold the Alt key and click on that, you can see that is all this layer is. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that. So if I just drag this into here, can't see any different because it's an inner stroke sat on top of a duplicate of itself. But if I go to the one underneath it, go to my arrow key, I'm now going to change the stroke color to white, and I'm going to change the pixel size to 20. And there we've got all that separation what we need to sort of, well, to create an ornate letter already. And that would be a separate bit where you can do your brush blending, then the mirrored section, then a bit where you can paint a nice black outline, then the mirrored section or the bright lines, then potentially, if you wanted to, that whole area could be glue chipped. So just to make that a little bit easier to follow, I'll just change the fill color of that to black, because that's ordinarily, you know, how we would view things when we're getting them prepped for a sandblasting stencil. And that's where we're at the moment. Already that is something you could do a lot with, but I'm just going to kind of have a little play around with it to make it a little bit more ornate. So firstly I'm going to go to the pen tool, and I can do that by pressing P, and you can see on the left toolbar the pen is selected. Now I have done a previous video on how to use the pen tool, so I'll put a link to that in the top right of the screen, because it is a little bit of an awkward tool to use when you get started, and I'm not going to cover exactly how to use it here, so if you wanted to kind of see that, yep, the link's up the top. And I'm looking to create a path that runs around the sort of curves of the bee. So the way I'm going to do that is to create a new layer, because if I do the path on any of these vector layers, it will apply the same properties that I've got set for them. So I'm going to start here, click around here, and then just roughly going around the center of this. And if you look at that, which I am now, I'm thinking that's not that tidy. If you ever want to edit a path, you can go back, use your arrow tools. So with the black arrow, when you click it, that selects the whole path. If you hold Control, the white arrow will select each point. And you can then start sort of tweaking these around if you think some of these curves don't look quite right, you know, which to me they weren't exactly how I wanted them. So I'm just going to give them a tiny little tweak here. And then if I get my paths up, I forgot to get them up at the beginning, go to Window and Paths. If I click off there and then click back on it, I can see that there, and that's looking fine. I don't mind that there is an ever so slight bump here, because I'm not actually going to be using this specific line as part of the decoration. So what I'm going to do now is open up my brush settings, and I'm on this new layer. So I've got my brush settings up, press B to go to my brush, and what I want is a perfectly circular hard-edged brush. Now this one here looks like that. I'm going to press the kind of square brackets, I don't know exactly what they're called, just to scale this down, something like that maybe. And then I'm going to go to the spacing, and then when I pull the spacing you can see how that brush is now going to go on if I paint it. Rather than paint a straight line, it's going to paint dots. And rather than me trying to do things freehand, I'm going to use this path. So I need to make sure my brush tool is selected, that my path is selected as well and visible, and then this button here is called stroke path. So I'm just going to switch my foreground and background colours, because down here I'm set to black and you won't see them. So if I just press X, that's swapped the foreground and background colours. And I'm going to click on this to stroke the path, and you can see that's painted those dots exactly along the path, and I think that looks pretty good so far. So I'm going to do a similar thing again. I don't need to create another layer because this is just a sort of pixel based layer, so I can use the same one, but I'm going to follow the same procedure and just kind of draw a path around the center of the curves of the bee. Something like that. And then if you press Control when you're on your pen tool and then click outside of the path, that'll just select it, the same as it would if you click off the path within the menu and then back on it. So making sure I go back to my brush by pressing B. Now just going to stroke that path and then click off there. There you go, really nice kind of ornate bee. Now I'm going to do the same on the stem, but I think to do that I'll probably just remove this particular dot because I don't want that to interact too close of it. So to do that, I can press my eraser, which is E, or that little block on the side here, and just going to click that over that bit. Press P to go to my pen. Hold Shift to click down, and that will give me a perfectly straight line. B again, and then stroke that path. And there you go. That's one way of kind of creating a really ornate letter very quickly out of any font. You know, I know this is a very ornate font, but this will work just as well with something like Arial, Gill Sans, Times New Roman. You know, you can do it on anything. But again, we've got everything in layers. So if you didn't want this, if you want to play around with them, you can always kind of hide them, delete them, try again. Have the brush sizes different for the dots, the spacing different. You know, it's all down to your imagination. And that's it. Those of you who follow the channel know what I kind of use these templates for, and you can envisage how this would kind of look when it's sort of blasted onto the back of the mirror. So I hope you have fun with the technique, and if you do, please share any of the kind of work that you do with it, because I'll be really interested in seeing it.